Hi, I'm Kurt Menke with Bird's Eye View GIS and the Q Cooperative. I'm based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm going to be talking about the best new features of QGIS 3X, one of my favorite topics. And I'm going to start right with this title slide here. This is a mesh data set from September 2017, which was a historic hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. And we're looking at a specific day, September 9th here. So we're seeing Hurricane Jose on this day building in the Eastern Caribbean, and Hurricane Irma having already gone through most of the Caribbean and about to make landfall in Florida. And on this map, we're seeing a couple new features that I wanted to highlight. First, we're seeing label callouts. This is a fairly new feature, and we can format these as shown on this map as simple lines or as Manhattan lines. Another feature is with the mesh data vectors. They're being shown as traces in this example, and you can also now show them as streamlines. So a really nice new feature that makes for pretty stunning visuals. And I want to frame this talk a little bit. I'm coming at this in part as an author. So last fall, I published my most recent book with Hans van der Kwast, QGIS for Hydrological Applications. And about a year and 3 months ago, I had published Discover QGIS 3X, and you'll recognize the image on the cover of that now. And these are both with Locate Press. And so one thing I do as an author is track new features to kind of judge when I'm going to have to update these books. So I'm going to break out of this presentation for a minute and get into QGIS. Okay, so here I am in QGIS, and I have a kind of a unique project open here which shows the timeline of QGIS with time across the x-axis and QGIS versions up the y-axis. And I want to credit Etienne Tremaille with this. You can download the data and project for this from his GitHub repo here. And I've added a few things to it, but this is both to show a new feature of QGIS 314 Pi, which is the temporal controller, which is one of the most groundbreaking new developments in QGIS in the last year. But this is also going to help me frame the talk in terms of time. So if we look at this project here, you can notice in the layers panel that these layers, many of them have this little clock icon in the indicator space. And if I hover over one of these, it tells me it's a temporal layer. So if I double click on that icon, it opens up the layer properties for that layer. And you'll notice that there's now a temporal tab available. And this allows me to temporally enable that layer, put it into temporal context. And so I can do this in a number of ways. I can use a fixed time range. I can use attributes in my attribute table and some other options there. So you can do this for vector, raster, mesh, WMTS. All the different data models are supported with this functionality now. You'll also notice that there's a new temporal controller panel button up here, and I'm going to click that to turn the temporal controller panel on and activate time for this project. And what I can do now, go back to the beginning here, I can start stepping through time. And as we do this, we see the current releases for the given date, and we have both the current stable release and the long-term release. So here we have Madeira 314. So this talk is going to focus on a particular chunk of time. So if we go up here to just after QGIS 3.6 NUSA was released, that's when I published Discover QGIS 3X. And that's kind of the point of departure for this talk. We're going to start looking at new features that have come out with Zanzibar 3.8 all the way up to 314 Pi. So this will be the period of time that we're going to focus on. So we're going to look at other examples of using the temporal controller, but you can do a lot with it. The banners are a point layer, for example, that are set up with a raster image marker. The Discover QGIS book is as well. So you can temporally enable all sorts of things, and it supports all the renderers that we have in QGIS. Okay, so now I'm back in my presentation. And another thing I want to mention as we go through this is that there are a lot of new features. So in preparation for this talk, I went through the visual change logs, and you can visit those from this URL here. And I made it a list of all the major new features by category since QGIS 3.8, and there's a lot of them. And in a 20-minute talk, there's no way I can cover all of this. So I'm going to hit the highlights, and I may not hit all the features that you consider the most important. This is just my opinion, of course, but I'm going to try to hit some of the more major features that have happened over the last year plus in QGIS. In the category of usability and aggravation avoidance, we now have a nice new feature. So here I have a map of COVID-19 cases per 1 million. And if I want to select some features to get some statistics on a couple of states, I'm sitting here with my shift key down, selecting individual counties. And sometimes, you go through quite a bit of time selecting features and then accidentally misclick and the selection goes away. Well, now you can go to the edit menu and choose reselect features to get that selection back, which is a huge win. So now if I want to get basic statistics, another new feature is that I can drag and drop layers and inputs onto processing algorithms. So that's really nice. I can just drag and drop. You can also drag layers between instances of QGIS now. And I can run and get my statistics. Another new feature related to this is the deselect features also has an option now to just deselect features from the current layer. Now we're going to switch into symbology improvements, and this is a repo man map I've been working on. And if I open up the style manager, I think we're all familiar with being able to manage marker, line, fill, and color ramp styles and tag them in to create categories. But there's now also a text format tab, and so you can use this to store text formats with font, color, size for title fonts and things like that. I use it for storing titles for different clients. Under label settings, you can store label styles, which will include label placement settings and things like that as well. And there's also a legend patch tab where I can have different legend patches on legends, and we'll see some examples of those later, but you can load them by URL or file. You can create your own by hitting the plus button and creating different shapes using expressions. You can tag these like all the other symbols. So we'll see some examples of this going forward, but it's a fantastic set of new features there. Another symbology improvement is the random marker fill. And this is one of the many symbology features and print composer features that has been produced thanks to Slayer, which is the Esri compatibility suite, which allows you to import MXDs and layer files from the Esri environment into QGIS. And so part of that development by North Road has been to create parallel styling options in QGIS so that MXDs, for example, can be imported successfully. And one of these is this random marker fill, which is here being used to show a wetland polygons using an SVG marker. You can also use this renderer to create a dot density effect. So here I'm using a density-based count setting with this marker, and for the point count, I'm using the data-defined override to point to a column for COVID cases in my data set and just make the dots very, very small. We also now have a contour renderer. So here, I'm going to duplicate the DEM and style it as contours. And from this point, I also have the option to set up index contours for this layer with a thicker line, for example. You can set the interval to whatever you need it to be. And then all your other styling options like blending modes are available as well. So this map basically just has a DEM styled 3 different ways, as a colored DEM, as a hill shade, and as contours to pull that whole effect together. So revisiting those custom legend patches that are now available. This is a quick map that I had to do a few weeks ago. That was a large poster with a lot of busy cartography on it. And to make things a lot more intuitive, I can use custom legend patch shapes. And this is a huge improvement. And you can make things much more kind of natural and intuitive to the reader. For example, having a buffer icon for roadside buffers or a contour icon for topographic contours. Another nice thing with this is that you can override the legend patch on a per item basis. So in this example, not only was this category of potential treatments bigger polygons, but I also needed to make the patch shape a little bigger to render all the marker fills within it. So I can do that on an individual basis. And there's some support that comes with this. So Tim Sutton has put up a nice YouTube video on how to make your own custom legend patch shapes. And there's also now a GitHub QGIS legend patch repo that several people have contributed to, where you can download patches, and a lot of these came from that repo. With the print composer, there's a lot of changes as well. So there's now a dedicated north arrow tool. There's a lot of new scale bar styles that have come out with 3.14. And again, this is all thanks to Slayer development. You can now have fractions in a scale bar and adjust, have controls for subdivisions and subdivision height. They're now related to the temporal controller, temporal controls in the print layout. So you can have set a temporal range for what you want shown on the map, and there's also data-defined overrides that you can use in concert with those. For legends on a print composition, you now have better control over columns, being able to split layers, and also a data-defined override for the count argument. And bookmarks are now also exposed within the print composition. So if you select a map item, you have a tool there that lets you get to your bookmarks and zoom to the extent of a bookmark in your print composition. One of the major new features is support for a new data provider, vector tiles. And so if you open up the data source manager, you'll see there's now a vector tile option where you can connect to online sources of vector tiles. Here I'm going to browse to a local MB tiles data set and add that to my map. And one of the nice features of vector tiles is quick, easy styling. So I'm going to zoom to a bookmark here and open up the properties for this layer, and I can load an OpenStreetMap QML style file to quickly style these OpenStreetMap vector tiles to use as a base map. There's also a plugin called Map Tiler, which you can install, and it comes with several pre-styled OpenStreetMap sets of vector tiles. So here I'm going to install the topo, or load the topo style from that plugin, and I get a nice OpenStreetMap styling in that topo style. Another feature of vector tiles is that there is processing algorithms for generating your own vector tile sets. So this is the algorithm for writing MB tiles. Switching to the graphical modeler, there's been a lot of improvements. I'm only going to cover a few, but if you move elements around now, you get kind of highlighted connector lines. You can also select multiple items in your graphical modeler and move them together. And there's now an add group box option. So this is just a visual grouping to make your model more intuitive. In a busy model, you can break it into sections visually. So here I'm just going to highlight the area that's the final steps in this model and apply a color to the box that kind of fits with what we're working on, kind of a light green color. And so now I have a nice box around the final steps of the model. There's another really nice new algorithm called conditional branch, which lets you set up some logical operations. You know, if yes, do this, if no, do that. And there's now variables that you can create at the model scope to work in your model. Another processing tool thing I'd like to highlight is that if you do batch processing, there's now some nice autofill options that you can use. You can also use some nice logic for input layer options, like filtering out invalid geometries and things like that. So the batch processing is becoming more and more powerful and easy to use. And there's a lot of new processing algorithms. There's a nice tool called overlap analysis that you can explore, join attributes from nearest. And I think two that'll get a lot of use are repair shapefile and rename table field. Obviously, there's been a lot of work on bookmarks in recent releases, so there's now an algorithm that goes along with that to convert a layer to a bookmark. And there's a whole suite of fuzzify raster algorithms and random raster algorithms as well. And another one I think will get a lot of use is detect dataset changes. It lets you compare two datasets and see what the differences are in geometry and attributes between the two. And lastly, in processing, there's a new ability to run QGIS in a command line executable environment without the GUI. So if you, the top example is from Linux Mint. The command line is QGIS process, and then you can use commands to get help. It's like most other well put together command line environments. You can get help for syntax. You can see a list of available commands. In the lower animated GIF here is using this environment in the via the OSGeo for Windows shell. So it's QGIS_process-QGIS. And then I'm running just a native buffer operation. So here I'm getting some of the syntax for the native buffers. I can see how to use it. And then I'll run the native buffer on a shape file to buffer it by some distance. So this is very new and just came out with 3.14 Pi. You can go to the blog post here to read more about it. This is a great post that has been put up in the last month or so that documents a lot of how to work with this. And no talk about new features in QGIS would be complete without talking about the expression engine. And we have some nice changes. It's now important. It's now possible to import and export user expression, so you can save an expression out to a JSON file. And down at the bottom, there's a really nice preview of the result of that expression that you've entered that you can go through on a feature by feature basis. And related to the temporal controller, there are new variables tied to that: map start time, map animation variables. So, and there's a lot of other new expressions that I don't have time to go through. So looping back into the temporal controller, which again is one of the most exciting ones, here we're looking at a map of tropical cyclone origin points. And before we get into that, as I mentioned, there are variables included with the temporal controller. So there's like animation start time, map start time that you can use to do expression-based symbology and use with data-defined overrides. So here you'll notice as these tropical cyclone points appear, they're very large and then they fade out. And this was done with an expression using these variables. Also, support for data in the temporal controller runs across all the major data models. So you can animate vector data, raster data, mesh data, and WMS T data. This demo on YouTube that Niall Dawson put together is a really nice, thorough introduction to things you can do with the temporal controller. So I really recommend you watch that. It's not quite a complete surrogate for the Time Manager plugin yet, but it's getting close. One thing you can't do just easily is set up something like this that has the time display. So this is just, you can do it pretty easily with a trick. This is just a point layer that's being labeled with one of the temporal variables to show time across the map. And similarly, this progress bar is another point that is set up with an ellipse marker that gets wider through time, basically. So again, this is all covered in Niall Dawson's great video, so I'm not going to go through that now, but just to show you some of the things that are possible in this environment. This is that original mesh data set that I started out with traces, And I use the temporal controller to export all of these still images and then stitch them together in GIMP to create a GIF animation of the hurricanes going through the Caribbean. And in the 3D environment, we have a much more intuitive way to navigate now. There is this navigation panel that you can open up, and the keyboard shortcuts are still there, but I think most would find this is a much easier way to navigate your way around a 3D scene. And so that's a really nice new feature. And also, with every new release of QGIS, you get more and more options in the 3D configuration. So again, I don't have time to go through all the little components of that are new in the 3D environment, but suffice to say, it's getting better and better with each new release. So that's my talk. I hope we have time for a few questions. This is my contact information. And I would also like to say, since we're getting near the close of this conference, what our pleasure it has been to be on the planning committee for this. There's just been a handful of us that have volunteered to put this on, and it's gone very well. I'm really happy with it. And I'm proud to say that we had no sponsors for this conference. We just did this free on a volunteer basis. So I want to encourage people to think about donating to QGIS.org, as we've been mentioning throughout the conference. It would be great if we could get some contributions to QGIS out of this. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Right, Kurt, that was wonderful. A lot of great features, tons of stuff that I didn't even know about. I think I can speak for everybody who's listening. Like the Reselect tool, mind equal blown. Not really a question, more of a comment there. If you had more time, what other features do you think you'd include in this presentation?
Well, I actually did cover a couple things that I had to cut out. There are some GUI changes, just like the news feed when you open up QGIS, that allows QGIS.org to be able to, give us information. That's really nice. But beyond that, let's see. I didn't cover any of the editing functionality in here. There's now, I know, a floating widget that allows you to display angle and distance settings. There's support for curved geometries when you're tracing now, some things like that.
Right. Awesome.
Yep. Even like some nitty gritty things like projections. People may notice now when you install QGIS, you also are prompted to install the grid files for projections, because now QGIS is relying on Proj to handle all the transformations. Right. And so there's a lot of deep things like that as well.
Oh, that's great. No, so I have a question about vector tiles. So when you load vector tiles into QGIS, I haven't played around with it enough. Can you actually run any analysis on that?
No, you can use the identify tool against them. Okay. But not really. They're mainly going to serve as a base map.
Okay, perfect. So I have a question from somebody on YouTube. Within new features, is there a tool to create project reports?
Oh, well, there is project reports. It's kind of tied to the atlas, so you can go into the print composer and start a project report and set up individual pages with headers and all of that. It's a pretty robust environment.
Amazing. And last one, is it possible to scale the size of labels inside polygons depending on their area? So smaller ones will be obviously different.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a data-defined override to do that. I don't think so. But one nice new labeling feature that is related to that is it's now possible to specify that you want polygon labels to appear outside the polygon in those cases. So.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. All right. So one bonus question here. So looking at the roadmap, QGIS's current roadmap, is there anything that's exciting you about what's coming out in the future?
Yeah, I don't really have the crystal ball, but I think that I do a lot of cartography, and I think the cartographic options are just entering the stratosphere now, and I expect that to continue. And so I look forward to what we're able to do cartographically in QGIS going forward. I think it's going to get better and better.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kurt, for your time. Buy Kurt's books. They're wonderful.